Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It's a quick video, just a little bit of updates. And also I want to rectify, it seems that there was some audio issues in my last video, and I haven't had audio issues in quite some time. But nevertheless, hopefully this video doesn't have any issues whatsoever. So, real fast. Look, Gaza at breaking point as Israel evacuates north. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in the besieged Gaza Strip are facing a real catastrophe. United Nations officials warn as Israel's heaviest bombardment of the occupied enclave rages on for the 11th consecutive day. In a report on Tuesday, the United Nations said the Israeli army continued pounding southern areas despite previously telling residents to move south ahead of a looming offensive by land, air, and sea on the tidal coastal strip of land. It also stressed that water remains a key issue as people will start dying without water. Warning that came hours after the World Health Organization said there are only 24 hours of water, electricity, fuel left in Gaza. That's why the attack isn't going to happen when all these elements and basic necessities run out. Residents of the besieged strip, home to more than 2 million Palestinians, have already been severely struggling with little to no water to drink, shower, or do laundry. They're also facing grave shortages of basic supplies, including baby formula and flour, with all supermarkets out of stock. There are the issues are pretty grave, and they're going to get far more stark and deteriorating real quick. And I don't expect an Israeli incursion into Gaza City just yet, because Biden is on his way there Wednesday, and also to visit Egypt and Jordan. Wonder what he's going to tell the leading officials there. Gaza professor Rafat Al-Yer says Israelis' bombardment is pushing Palestinians in the besieged enclave into smaller areas and sparses, with many households now hosting several families at once. Like I said in previous videos, that with the 1.1 million displaced from Gaza City heading south, they're going into smaller enclaves, which will cause overpopulation, will overpopulate these smaller enclaves. People are forced out of their homes. Half go to shelters, mainly UN shelters, he told Al Jazeera, adding that the other half went on to live with relatives and even neighbors. There are always so many people killed in each bombing, each massacre, because each family is hosting. Al-Rir himself, who lives with his wife and 6 children, is currently hosting 4 families, overwhelmingly women and children, because half of the Gaza Strip is children. Canada tells citizens to leave Lebanon amid ongoing fighting. Melanie Joly, Canada's foreign minister, has urged Canadian citizens in Lebanon to leave the country while commercial flights are still available amid a very volatile situation in the region. If you are in Lebanon, it is now time to leave while commercial flights are available. Canadians in Tel Aviv and the West Bank who wanted to leave should take advantage of military flights that Ottawa is operating to Athens, she said. South Africa's foreign minister speaks with Hania about humanitarian aid. South Africa's foreign minister has said she spoke with Hamas leader Ismail Hania about humanitarian aid for Palestinians. Minister Nalindi Pandor and Hamas leader discussed how to get the necessary humanitarian aid to Gaza and other parts of the Palestinian territories. The Department of International Relations and Cooperation said in a statement. During the call, and in line with the government's position, Minister Pandor reiterated solidarity and support for the people of Palestine and expressed sadness and regret for the loss of innocent lives, both Palestinians and Israelis. Now, the issue at hand is basically how we can lessen the casualties on both sides here, because this is about to either become really bad real quick, or this can drag on and become a systematic campaign by the Israeli government. And I think the former is much more apt to be what the Netanyahu and the unity government wants. And what they want is the elimination of Gaza City. and so that it could come under the control of either the Israeli government or it is non-inhabitable by Palestinians. So since Gaza Strip is not under the control of the Israeli military inside of it, it certainly controls the borders. And as always, I will update you with latest information. But also, I did want to give a brief summary about what I talked about in my previous video yesterday before I had about 4 minutes of interrupted audio silence and jarbled nonsense. But I'm going to leave the video up because the more important aspects of that video remain untouched. And well, I'll just give a short summary about how the Israeli government saw Hamas as an asset. What I mean by that, I don't mean they created Hamas. Hamas was a creation of Ahmed Yassin, who is actually a Palestinian politician, an imam, and a disabled cleric who founded the Mujama al-Islamiyah, which was established in 1973 as an Islamic charity, and who Yassin was involved with the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, which is the Palestinian branch. Mujama al-Islamiyah was the reason behind, was the original name, and then soon after, in I think I want to say 86, 87, after the outbreak of the first Intifada, Hamas was actually founded by Yassin. They became more increasingly involved in the Israeli-Palestine conflict. But initially, when the Mujama al-Islamiyah was created in 1973 by Sheikh Yassin, the Israeli government labeled it as a charity, knowing that Yassin himself was part of the Palestinian branch Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, the Jordanian Muslim Brotherhood. They basically gave life to the Frankenstein monster. What I mean by that is that at that time, there was a socialist-led movement called the Palestinian Liberation Organization, led by Yasser Arafat. And Hamas opposed the PLO letters of mutual recognition, which was basically an exchange between the PLO and the Rabin government, which began to agree cooperating towards a peaceful resolution to the conflict. They also opposed the Oslo Accords in 1993, and that was overseen by President Clinton, in which they wanted to make a unilateral agreement between the Israeli government and the PLO to where there'll be more freedom of movement, less restrictions on Israeli-controlled Palestinian areas. And what Hamas did basically was oppose the PLO, because what the Israeli government feared was that the PLO was getting sympathy from the European international theater. Countries like France and Germany and Spain were now paying attention to the problem, which was the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And ever since 2007, Hamas has fought various wars with the Israeli military, the IDF, and sought on an Islamic Palestinian state over the combined territories of Israel and created the Hamas Charter. The Hamas Charter actually warns of a future that doesn't involve Israelis and wants to destroy the Israeli state. Now, what you may ask, why would Israel basically give life to Yassin's original group, the Mujama al-Islamiyah, knowing full well that they're a branch of the Egyptian Jordanian Muslim Brotherhood, knowing full well that the group that arisen out of the Islamiyah group were filled with Palestinian resistance fighters and members of the Palestinian Muslim Brotherhood. You know the ideology of these people? Salafi, Wahhabi Islam. And you know that they are the enemy to the very state that you service in. Well, nothing is as it seems. And, you know, why take my word for it? Let's go to articles that were written by the Times of Israel. And in this case, this was an article written in 2018 by Shlomo Allegra. Hamas is Israel's own creation. What does he mean by that? During the early 1970s, the greatest enemy to Israel was known as the Palestinian Liberation Organization, who was known for waging terror attacks on Israeli civilians and targets all over the world. Maybe the Fatah branch. Remember, there was two branches of the PLO. Yasser Arafat and Abu Nidal's own branch, which was the more violent branch. Yeah. Abu Nidal was basically a secularist. He wasn't an Islamist. He was a contractor, a terrorist contractor. And basically, foreign governments hired him to conduct operations. It's even stated that he never denied he was an Israeli spy either. Born in Israel. I believe he was born in Jenin or Haifa. Could be wrong. But I know he was born in Israel. And the article goes on to state that the PLO was known for being a socialist organization whose sole purpose was the elimination of the state of Israel, along with the establishment of the socialist state of Palestine, where the constitution would be run by secular Marxism rather than Islam. This is important because during this period of the 1970s and 80s, we saw a conflict with Islamism, Pan-Arabism, and socialism within Arab states. The predicating ideology, which was at this point dying out, was Arab nationalism, or as it was called, Nasserism, under the nickname of the former Egyptian president Gamal Abdel Nasser, in which Arab nationalism in countries like Egypt and Afghanistan, Syria, Libya. If you ever look at pictures of the 1950s and 60s, you'll notice that there's no niqab or hijabs. Women went to universities. There was a freedom of expression. The arts prospered during this time. So there was almost a Western style themed way of living, but under the Arab rule because what Nasser and other socialist leaders saw was that they didn't want the Arab nations to be dependent on Great Britain or the West, the United States, for example. They wanted to commiserate trade with China and Russia to make the Arab world an economic power. And this was actually a threat to who? The West, Great Britain, and Israel. And what replaced Arab nationalism during this period? Islamism, which was given life under the oil boom by Saudi Arabia and the Gulf. The modern day founders of Wahhabism, Saudi Arabia. Due to the short-sightedness of the Rabin administration and later Menachem Begin, there was an idea to bring about a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood into Gaza and the Palestinian territories to counter the balance and popularity of the PLO, because the PLO was getting sympathy about a two-state solution. It's not a conspiracy. It's a historical fact. So Israel would rather help facilitate the rise of the Mujama al-Islamiyah, which later became Hamas, knowing full well what they were going to do, knowing full well that this would become a radical organization. But if you look at the broader picture here, why would Israel create an enemy? Well, think of it like this. You can get rid of your own enemies. And this is coming from Israel's leaders' own mouths. That the bigger enemy here was the PLO. And later on, the Palestinian Authority under Abu Mazen, known as Mahmoud Abbas. And Hamas was a virulent reactionary group. Hamas controlled the Gaza Strip and Palestinian Authority controlled West Bank. I mean, there are a few Hamas operatives in West Bank, but the major base of operations in Gaza. Just like the United States was funding the Taliban to fight in Afghanistan against the Soviets to bring down the communists, so too was Israel selling arms to Iran to fight the archenemy Iraq during the 1980s. Islamic fundamentalism was not seen as a threat to world peace. Instead, it was Marxist terrorists around the world who were seen as a threat. Some Muslim extremists were seen as a natural ally against the godless communists. That's right. You know, there's another article from the Times of Israel, and it was written by Tal Schneider, but this is recent. Netanyahu propped up Hamas. Now it's blown up in our faces. For years, the various governments led by Benjamin Netanyahu took an approach that divided power between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. That was another reason to keep power separate from each other and the Palestinians, bringing Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas to his knees while making moves that propped up Hamas terror group. The idea was to prevent Abbas or anyone else in the Palestinian Authority's West Bank government from advancing toward the establishment of a Palestinian state. That's the whole reason for Hamas's existence. If Israel, like I said before, if Israel wanted to destroy Hamas, get rid of them, it's so easy to do so because unlike the United States, Israel is in a closed environment, controlled environment. It's unique in the face of the world because here you have Gaza, which is surrounded by the Israeli military, in which Israeli spies live within the populace. And they know the movements of Hamas. They know who's coming to the border fences or checkpoints, or to the Rafah crossing south of the border, or to the Lebanese northern border. It's not like they don't know these things. That's what makes this attack by Hamas remarkable. It's all right. How did Israel not see it? Nevertheless, they can actually go in there and destroy the hierarchy of Hamas. By the way, the leadership doesn't even live in the Gaza Strip. Thus, amid the bid to impair Abbas, Hamas was upgraded from a mere terror group to an organization with which Israel held to indirect negotiations via Egypt, and one that was allowed to receive infusions of cash from abroad, namely Qatar. Hamas was also included in discussions about increasing the number of work permits Israel granted to Gaza laborers, which kept money flowing into Gaza, meaning food for families and the ability to purchase basic products. Basically, the Israeli government made a deal with the terrorist group Hamas about having Gazan laborers who don't have to wait hours at checkpoints getting out of Gaza and coming into Gaza. And that's, it's not a definite either because, the Israeli military can control who comes in and out of Gaza. Israeli officials said these permits, which allow Gazan laborers to earn higher salaries than they would in their enclave, were a powerful tool to help preserve calm. And by the way, the United Nations and international criminal courts actually pressured the Israeli government to allow freedom of movement for the Palestinians in Gaza Strip. Due to the outrage, the Israeli government made a deal with Hamas. Well, they should have made a deal with the Palestinians. Now, remember, Hamas is voted in as a government, but not the military. The military ran out the Fatah secular group and overtook the leadership of the Palestinian government by force, led by the Qassam Brigade, which is the military wing of Hamas. So when people say, oh, the Palestinians voted for Hamas, the majority didn't. And a lot of people actually protested Hamas from representing them, but they had no choice. Think Palestinians have a choice against an armed militant wing like Hamas? No. These people barely have running water or basic necessities. Can't fight back against these people. It's not like they asked for them to overthrow the Fatah government either. Toward the end of Netanyahu's fifth government in 2021, approximately 2,000 to 3,000 work permits were issued to Gazans. This number climbed to 5,000, and during the Bennett Lapid government, more sharply to 10,000. And for those people that think that's a lot, there are 3 million people that live in Gaza. I think it's three and a half. 10,000 work permits. No wonder poverty is rife in this enclave. And, when you go down the article, it actually talks about how most of the time Israeli policy was to treat the Palestinian Authority as a burden and Hamas as an asset. Far-right Benziel Smotrich, now the finance minister of the hardline government and leader of the religious Zionism party, said so himself in 2015. That's the video I showed in the previous video yesterday. In the beginning, that's Benziel Smotrich, the Israeli finance minister, who said that the Palestinian Authority was the enemy and that Hamas is the asset. According to various reports, Netanyahu made a similar point at a Likud faction meeting in early 2019 when he quoted as saying that those who oppose the Palestinian state should support the transfer of funds to Gaza, because maintaining the separation between the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza would prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. That's Netanyahu stating this to a Likud faction meeting. That's the whole point of Hamas's existence, because without Hamas, the Israeli military can't go in and enforce their brutal conditions, nor can they bomb a hotel or a school or a hospital without saying there's a Hamas operative in there. Because without Hamas, how are they ever going to enforce their brutal authority on the Palestinians? Because the world will say, "What the hell are you doing?" But with Hamas in there, they can always use the excuse that, oh, the whole area is controlled by Hamas. Right now, currently, this is the excuse, is that the American media in this country are actually giving allowance to the Israeli government about killing children, saying it's war. Even senators in this country, like Tim Scott and Ron DeSantis, state that the children are basically, and as well as the Palestinians, are all anti-Semites, and that these refugees should never be accepted anywhere besides Arab states. Meanwhile, the occupiers are the Israeli Zionists, backed by the U.S. government. We create refugees, whether it's South America, Central America during the 1970s and 80s, or the Middle East from the 1990s to current time. Because who's bombing these countries? Who's actually giving the CIA the allowance to commit coups to overthrow governments? The United States government. That's who. So that's basically the rundown about why Hamas is allowed to exist and how Hamas is seen as an asset to the Israeli government. It's so to basically keep subjugating the Palestinian people under Israeli rule, and also to basically eliminate Israel's preconceived enemies, which are the PLO and the Palestinian Authority. And also, the main point is to distract the Palestinians and the public outside of these borders from a two-state solution, which is what Israel doesn't want. All right. If there's any more updates, as usual, I'll keep you informed, and have a good day, everybody.